Hello and welcome everyone to the first pre-season podcast for the NRL SuperCoach Hub. I'm Scoop and I'm here with SuperCoach Krupt and Mr. Charity. How are you going, Mr. Charity?
I am doing well. I'm a bit hot down here in Sydney, but chilling and ready to get stuck into some SuperCoach.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to talk about, especially with some of the recent news. SuperCoach Krupt, have you been pushing your team around with some of this recent hooker news?
Oh, Scoop, I have actually. I've had a little play with a few different setups. This hooker news today, which I guess we'll get into a little bit later on, it's thrown a few curveballs if you wish to go in a few different directions, or you can just stay the true course and go down there with the Harry Green option, which I'm sure we'll discuss.
100%. I think it's going to be interesting. I think you brought up just before we started that Nico Hines getting injured, using all that cash, we could be in for a similar situation depending on which way coaches want to go. Anyway, so we might as well just break the news. We are looking at the Hooker podcast for this first episode. We're going to go in depth for this position, talk about the top guns, some of the mid-ranges, how many of them are worth it, or if we just throw them in the bin, and a couple of cheapies to finish off with and some hot takes. So the big news that's popped around this morning is that Brad Arthur's come out and said he wants 80-minute hookers at the Eels. That is pretty big, hey, considering how cheap both of those potential options are, right? SuperCoach Krupt.
That's huge, absolutely. Like that's if he definitely does go down that line, there's a lot more water to go under this bridge. But if he does go down that line of 80-minute hookers, if that's what we end up with come round one and onwards, then that could change the dynamics of some of the teams that are out there regarding SuperCoach. We don't necessarily have to go with the one gun, one cheapie, which I'm pretty sure was the setup that we'll probably talk about a little bit, which most people from what I've seen and heard are running with. That definitely can throw a few curveballs out there about some different ways to splash the cash.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that person who we probably had in our teams before then and is 400k more expensive than those options, we'll start right at the top. Harry Grant, Mr. Consistent, just gets it done year on year. It was actually a little bit lower than 2022, but we also didn't have Pappenhausen. So, Mr. Charity, if Pappenhausen does happen to be fit and firing for round one, looks good in trials, how hard is it going to be to leave Grant out? And what do you see from him for the start of the year?
See, for me, I'm an Eels fan and have always hated the Storm since 2009. So for me, I try to not touch Storm players at all. I'm personally running with JMK, which we can touch on a little bit later as to why. But Grant is a really solid choice, especially with Pappenhausen back. For me, it's if they can get their forwards rolling forward. That's where Harry Grant does his best work. So if we can start to see a little bit of punch out of the Storm forwards, that's when I can really start to see Grant being that back to that dominant factor in SuperCoach.
Yeah, 100%. I do agree. I think the attacking upside of Pappenhausen will be pretty big. In 2022, when he actually played with Harry Grant, apart from the injury game, he averaged 87, I think it was, and dropped down to about 71 without him. But to counteract that, SuperCoach Krupt, what do you think of their start? I think they've got the four worst teams other than themselves to start off the year and a bye.
Absolutely. Let me just pull up their actual draw for us.
They've got Panthers, Warriors, Titans, bye Broncos.
Actually, I think you'll find might be Penrith, New Zealand, Newcastle, bye Broncos. So I think you'll find that they've got Newcastle in round 3, which from a SuperCoach perspective are the hardest, or wasn't the hardest, that gave up the least amount of SuperCoach points for an opposition team. So look, that doesn't mean that Harry Grant necessarily is going to score lower than what he traditionally does when he kicks off a season. But it's something you've got to factor in when you're going, is that where I want to spend that much of my salary cap on the most premium hooker available, who has, statistically speaking, the four of the teams that gave up the least amount of SuperCoach points. So as well as throwing in the round 4 bye. That 4 bye, I think and I've made an article about this as well as my own podcast talking about this a little bit further, where the round 4 or any round buys that come early in the season, you do have to be aware of them because they can affect your averages if you're looking at jumping off or making value, and they bring some other players into being more viable options as well on average over those early rounds.
Definitely. If you've got somebody like a Brayley or a Levi as your second hooker, you might only be scoring 40 points in that round. So it's definitely a factor that you've got to take into consideration.
Yeah, with Harry Grant, let me give you some stats on him. So his first 10 games of the 2023 season, after his first 10 games, he had an average of 72. His last 10 games, he had an average of 82. So it's a 10-point swing for his first 10 to his last 10. And his biggest scores came after round 15, Harry Grant's. So after round 15 is when he started putting up the big numbers, 149, 123, 110. They all came after that round 15. And another important thing with him is he has buys this in. If you're choosing Harry Grant, you're probably running with him for potentially the whole season, or at least until Origin. Then you'll decide what you want to do. He has buys in round 4, 13, and 19. That's his buys or Storm's buys for this particular season coming up. Now, 4, we touched on very briefly, is a hard one because it's an early buy. So it's one of those things where, do you want to have such a large part of your salary cap on the bench when you don't really have a good reserve player to kick in there and equal what he's going to be putting out there? Or are you better dropping down 5-10 points on average and picking up maybe the second best player, JMK or somebody else, because it'll equalize out in the first few rounds to a degree, depending on other factors. Also, he plays that first, they have a buy in round 13, which would be our first major buy, round 13, and then 19 as well. So round 19 is another one of those major buys, 13, 16, and 19. That's just where his buys fall. Last season, he did actually play and back up every one of the minor buys. So he backed up and played 75 minutes in every minor buy last season and scored pretty well in the first 2 of them, if I remember correctly. So he does have a tendency there to back up straight away, and he does perform at a high level. So it's one of those things, he kicks in those high scores after round 15. He backed up on all those mini buys, which we found out last season was critical to success in SuperCoach, is those more so the mini buys than the major buys where we needed to get 17 on the park, not 13.
Yeah, I think it was very valuable to have him there for those minor buy rounds. They were a bit killer last year just because we had those 3 teams. I think the Queensland hooker split helped him a little bit, not super tired from Origin, but yeah. We'll go to the next option on the list here. We brought it up in that discussion a bit, and I think you said you might be starting for Mr. Charity, and that is JMK. So tell us about that pick.
I had JMK for a little bit of last year, and he just didn't let me down. It was when he was injured that he went off, and then I had to trade him out. But I just have good feelings about Jeremy Marshall-King. I think another year under Wayne Bennett will help. So I really like what he's got. I really like his draw as well. It's pretty, for the Dolphins, pretty easy for the most part. It gets a little bit harder after the sort of Tigers, but he's also playing in that round 13 period, and he's not getting selected for Origin. So you've got a little bit more security in there, which gives you a bit more wiggle room when it comes to making sure you can start making the other trades that you're going to want to be making throughout the rest of that year, or at least the first part of this year. That's my reasoning behind it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I had JMK in my team for quite a while too this preseason, and a big reason was because of that early draw. What do we got? We got Cows, Dragons, by Titans, Tigers, Broncos, Para, Newcastle. So yeah, at least the first couple of games are really, really soft. He might be able to get a few assists. The important thing that I found very interesting as well is that the Dolphins are the 2023 version of the Eels. They are the only team that plays all 3 Origin rounds. And as somebody who probably won't be playing Origin, he could be extremely valuable as a good hooker in those rounds.
Definitely.
Absolutely. 100%. There is a world there. I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but I'm pretty sure there is a world there too. Mr. Charity, around, you were talking about going JMK to start off with. There is a world where you could actually go JMK, and if you're willing to use your trades to find the right pattern of games, you could actually jump off ride JMK through to round 13 where he plays that major buy. In round 14, he's on a buy himself, and then you could switch to Grant, who just came off a buy. So there is a world, and get him on the minor buy. So there is a world there where you could actually run JMK at the start and jump to Grant and come around 14 and then ride him for all the minor buys, which we've just discussed how he backs up on those as well. And yes, you'd miss Grant in some of those major buys, but you only need a best 13 on the field, and that's not necessarily something that's hard to cover, a best 13.
I like the way you think.
Yeah, there's definitely a world where you can write him up too, because with those injury-affected games, if you take those out, instead of averaging low 60s, he was averaging 69.3, which is a bit of an uptick, which I quite like. All right, so the last one in that sort of premium bracket that we've got is Damien Cook. I've barely seen him mentioned at all this preseason. Hey, I think the Marmazilis re-signing has spooked everybody away, and just the fact that he's another year older. Is there any world where Cook's going to be relevant at any point this season?
I'll answer that because I had Cook all last season, pretty much. I ran Cook all the way through. I never bought Grant the whole entire of 2023. And still, made it to top 17 overall. So it's not like you have to run with Grant. It's not a lay down misère that you have to get the most premium option in order to do well. And I've heard some chatter out there about Payne Haas as well. People talking about, do you really need Payne Haas, even though that's got nothing to do with hookers? But it's talking about those premium options. Do you absolutely have to, or can you find value elsewhere and run with them and hold with them and look for the highest ceiling guys? But with Cook, I ran with him all last season, and to be honest, I was pretty disappointed because in 2022, he outperformed his 23 season. So he actually had a downtick in performance in 23, which obviously was unfortunate. I wasn't relying on that or hoping on that. I was hoping for him to match what he did in 22. It wasn't a huge downtick, but it definitely was a downtick. In 23, he averaged, last season, he averaged 65, and in 22, he averaged 75. So potentially about 10 points of value there if he was to mirror what he did in season 22. So look, there is a thought there that maybe if he can get back to that kind of form of 22, that there is some value in Cook. He's always a solid scorer. He's not the kind of guy that will drop a 20 or a 30 on you. Typically speaking, he's someone that's a fairly solid scorer. So he's a solid option to put in there with potentially some upside. He did only have 2 scores in 100 last season, and he only had 2 in 22 as well. So when we talk about ceilings, it's Grant and then Daylight, really, as far as the ceiling is concerned. JMK, we haven't really seen the best of him at the Dolphins under Wayne Bennett. So we don't know whether he can perform to that kind of level or what he can do at the moment based on those injuries. But with Cook, he doesn't really have that ceiling in the last 2 years that a Grant and potentially a JMK have. But a solid option to put in your team with possible upside.
Yeah. Do you think part of the reason that he did drop and the reason might be a bounce back is just the Bunnies' form? That I think not many of us were expecting him to fall to 9th, was it, last year? So there could be some uptick there. Just overall in the gun brackets, is there any other people that you think might move up to that bracket, moving on to this sort of next priced section?
That's a tricky question. I think, when you're looking at your guns, you've obviously got that JMK, that Cook, the Grant side of things. I think the two that stand out to me as ones that could probably elevate is Robson and Brayley, because they are that 80-minute hooker sort of side of things. That's where I think some people may be able to find value. Brayley was very consistent for me when I had him in my team. So I think there's a lot to take from that. But I think when we're looking at the gun side of things, your JMK, Cook, and Grant are just too obvious of a choice if that's what the approach that you're going for is, having a gun and a cheapie. That's my take anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree, Mr. Charity. I think you're spot on. Hey, like Robson, I think to me is the definite standout as far as potential to make it back up to that level again and push it with the bigger boys. Maybe not Harry Grant, but push it with some of those other fellas. And I've seen it probably... besides Harry Grant, I would say Robson's probably the next hooker I've seen in people's teams that have been sent to me to have a look at. So Robson's definitely a popular option that's out there. I think a lot of people are looking definitely hard at him. I think the Cowboys' draw last season was spoken about a lot, how good it was to kick off, and unfortunately they didn't really follow through on that very much. But I got a good feeling about the Cowboys this season. I think that they could be in for a good season. So if that is the case, I would like to think that Robson is a big part of that. But I don't think he'll make it into my team if that's any help.
I think one of the things to look out for, I know we've got in the comments, is Appy as one of the options here. I'm a bit worried about Appy with the end of season, 6 to 7 games towards the end of the season where he was goal kicking. I feel like that really pushed his numbers up. I also think when we're talking about cheapies, the Talon De Silva coming in, I think Benji is going to look to the future and want to bring sort of a younger player in to try and, give Appy a little bit more free time. So I am a bit worried. I could be wrong here, and it could be Appy's season. But for me, I think Appy's a bit of a trap.
Yeah, it's hard to know when you don't have the look at the bench with the round one bye as well. I think it makes it just a little bit harder. All right, so that does that section. Is there anybody in that sort of mid-price section that anyone's looking at? Somebody like, I don't know, a Cheese or a Reed Marnie or something like that, or it's just really not much upside and not huge ceiling, so it's kind of no man's land.
Are we going to throw Sonny Luke into that territory as well? Okay, I'll take that as a no. I think you mentioned it before, Mr. Charity, but Blake Brayley, I've got interest there as well, to be honest. And I'm not sure that's coming because of the Sharks' draw and the ease of their draw as well this season. Whether that's weighing it into looking at Brayley a bit heavier than what I normally would. But Blake Brayley definitely is someone that has piqued my interest. He only scored one try in all of 2023, so from an attacking point of view, not great. He scored 3 in 2022. He had 108 points in try assists in 2023 and 144 in try assists in 2022. So last season, it didn't really kick on again like 2022 did. So from an attacking point of view, if Cronulla can get a bit of an easier run into the season and Brayley can find some of that 22 form, then potentially, again, there's some value and some upside there in Blake Brayley, not the Jaden Brayley variety.
I think there's a couple of good options that you can go for if you're looking for those mid-ranges. We've had one of the comments saying Wade Egan as a really good choice. If he can stay on the field, 100%, he's a great option. But the amount of times I had someone who traded him in, traded him out, traded him back in, it's going to be tough. I think Sam Verrills has always been a favourite of mine. I think he's a really good base stat player, and when he can stay on the field, similar to Wade Egan, he can be a really high performer. And I think with the influence of Dez coming to the Titans, Dez has a very strong focus on forward packs. And if you can get Sam Verrills on the roll with that strong forward pack, I think that's a very good option. And then the only other one I had here on the list was Lachlan Croker from the Seagulls. I think that's a sneaky one if you're looking for like a pod play. Lachlan Croker could be a pod play mid-ranged hooker, but it's definitely not my first choice. But those are my mid-ranges.
Yeah, he went on a bit of a run in the mid-season there, didn't he? He started knocking out some really good scores, but I guess we're all going to be looking to see whether Gordon is going to be on the bench. So, yeah, one to look at.
Yeah, Wade Egan's a great shout. I like the Wade Egan shout as well. I've had a good look at him today, actually, before this podcast. And if we could be certain that HIAs weren't going to play a role, I think there'd be many of us coaches jumping right on that Wade Egan bandwagon. But you just can't take that risk. You can't afford to have the possibility of a 10 or 15 score come into there because of a HIA, as well as a trade that you've got to waste as well, based on having to trade him out if he's out for a indefinite period of time, especially because he's got a history there as well. It's just something to keep in mind. It's a bit like Ponga as well. If he gets another HIA, there's a chance it's longer out than what some others might be for their first or second one.
Yeah, I would put Wade Egan in my team, but it just terrifies me. It's like Ponga, as you said, and JWH and a few players like that. You just watch games in fear of them going down and not coming back on. So if you get lucky and you're really bold, sure, you can go for it. I think there is some value there, especially if the Warriors continue to do pretty well this year. But yeah, just beware of that head knock factor.
My advice there as well would be think about the structure of your team. And I know we're discussing just hookers at the moment. And I don't think hookers is the place we have to get too fancy with, as far as this most likely won't be the make or break of your Supercoach season is who you throw into the hooker position. There's going to be some other positions that we're going to cover on the Supercoach Hub podcast in the weeks coming forward, where definitely in those ones there are some moves that you can make. But I think looking for the Wade Egan types or even a Blake Brayley, I think there's some other options just to either play it safe or save some money and use that cash elsewhere in your team. I don't know whether you need to try and find someone in that mid-range as your gun hooker of sorts and hope that they get to a gun themselves. I think there's other ways you can play that hooker role, either straight down the line or save some cash.
Yeah, 100%. I think I agree. There's a couple types like your Brandon Smiths, your Jacob Littles. It's like, oh, if they get good minutes this year, they might be good, but that's a might, and they're kind of not gun and not quite cheapy. So I think it's just go up or go down and don't be too fancy about it.
And with the Brandon Smith, we haven't seen Connor Watson's role yet. Do you know what I mean? Like we don't know
Yeah.
what his role in that team's going to be. What's that going to look like? What does that do to Brandon Smith's role moving forward when he needs a rest? Does Connor Watson play 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes? How many minutes does he play at hooker? How many minutes in the middle does Smith go for? We just don't know. It's too many unknowns. And I think we all got a little burnt. Well, a lot of us got a little burnt last season with Brandon Smith and Sonny Luke combo. And I think there's a fair few of us that aren't willing to go down that path again. But in saying that as well, JMK, back to a conversation at the start, we didn't mention, but with JMK, the other risk there, just for everyone to be aware of, is we're going to want to wait till we see trials and team lists just to make sure what the bench setup, because there's a good point, Scoop. The bench setup's going to be important for Dolphins too. Is there a Harrison Graham, or what's going to be on that bench at the Dolphins? Is he definitely going to be playing 80, or is it a smaller role?
Yeah. Would a Nicarima on the bench put you off JMK? Because he's got the hooker position, but like he didn't do a lot of that last year. But on the flip side, they just filled up their backline, so maybe he does do a little bit.
What do you think, Mr. Charity? You're looking at JMK?
Yeah, no, I'm looking at JMK. I'm just worried if the Nicarimas, the Harrison Grahams, I think Max Plath, was that another one that was floated as a potential hooker? So I'm a bit worried about that. But I think we have faith in Jeremy Marshall-King. Wayne Bennett knows what he's doing and knows that his team looks very, very different when JMK is on the field. So I'm not too worried about that. The Nicarima shout, that's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Is there sort of anybody else in that sort of 500 to below bracket before we get to the cheapies, or just jump straight into them, you reckon?
Well, I guess in the cheapie range, is that where we will talk about our Parramatta friends?
Yeah, somewhere below about 350-ish, where they all start to come in.
Yeah. Oh, then something that maybe influences that is your Phoenix Crossland at 470. How's that going to play out with the Jaden Brayley side of things? And this is almost the transition into the cheapie chat. So is anyone looking at Phoenix Crossland?
I don't think so. I think for me, he's going to do the Kurt Mann role. I mean, he's probably going to, there's a good chance he takes a couple hooker minutes, but Brayley has in the past played 80. So, I mean, I don't see the opportunity for him to do equal or better than last year.
I'm looking at Crossland, definitely. I'm looking at him really closely. But not because I want him in my team. I want to know how he's going to affect Jaden Brayley. So I'm looking at him really closely. Particularly in the trials, particularly come Team List Tuesday, I'm definitely looking at Phoenix Crossland. I don't know whether Jaden Brayley plays the 80, to be honest. Like, I've read both ways, where some people are saying no, he definitely will, but then I've read other reports too saying that no, he won't be playing anything like 80 minutes. So the trials that we have coming up are going to be so critical for lots of players, and we've already mentioned a few hookers in this list as well, where trials are going to play a pretty important role to whether or not you can go down that pathway or whether you need to look left or right. Like, yeah, trials will tell us a lot, as will Team List Tuesday, obviously.
Yeah. I think with Crossland, I think he's going to be that number 14. You've got Brayley to start, and then in case anything happens with your halfbacks, you know that Crossland can slot in there and Brayley just plays the full 80. Or if Brayley's on a roll and can keep playing the 80, Crossland will come on and sort of that like small roaming ball playing 13. So that's sort of my take on where I think Crossland will be at. But it'll be interesting in the trials, definitely, to see what happens there.
Yeah. How many minutes do you reckon Brayley would need in order to tip him over to a bye? Do you think it'd be 65, 70 at least?
I think 50.
Yeah, I'd want him around that 60 mark, ideally. But But again, that's only we're only talking about as a backup hooker. He was never going to be the number one in my Supercoach team. So, as a backup hooker for value purposes, I would say that 60 mark most likely would be the number for me. But to be honest, I'm hoping and praying that we do see something closer to that 80 mark. And like you say, Mr. Charity, that Crossland's there just as a backup in case. They do need to rest him, especially early in the season. I mean, he's coming back from an injury as well. Do you know what I mean? Like he may well get played smaller minutes at the start of the season and then gradually the workload will increase. So we may not even get all the answers that we want straight up. It may take some time here as well before we get some of these answers that we're chasing. So you might just have to be patient with him. But as a number 2 hooker, you can be patient with that number 2 hooker unless you're wanting to play him because you've got your number 1 on a bye early in the rounds.
Well, then I have a question for you then. If, for example, we have Brayley playing only 30 minutes or 50 minutes or whatever it is, sort of down, not 60 minutes, how long are you waiting to keep him before you trade out a Jaden Brayley, especially considering if you're running Grant, you've got that round 4 bye. What are you sort of doing in that situation?
For me personally, it's an easy switch. If I ran, let's say, if I was a super coach running Grant and Brayley, after the first 2 rounds, I'm making a decision. And most likely the reason why I'm doing that for is because I'll be looking at the 2 Parramatta hookers, whichever one gets the role. I'll be looking at their minutes and I'll be looking at making that switch across to that next cheapy, mid to cheap hooker and who I can get value from, who I can make 100 to 200K from, as well as 40 to 60 points off, ideally, on that as a second hooker, so a value option. If Bradley wasn't that after 2 rounds and that one of the other guys were, I'm jumping. If he's not and there's no other option, I'd stick.
Smart man.
Definitely. Speaking of those Parramatta hookers, now finally we get to the elephant in the room. Brad Arthur coming out and saying that he wants to play one hooker, 80 minutes coming through. I mean, both of these guys are fantastic options. Hey, Hands or Lussick, depending on who starts, both in the low 300s. It's just if you're not gonna go Brayley, surely you've just got to fill up with one of the 2 para hookers.
Yep. I am looking at this very, very closely as an Eels supporter. I loved when Hands was playing. Hands, as an Eels fan, it was great to see him. He reminded me of those days when we saw Marnie playing and just that combination with, Moses and Dylan Brown and Gutherson. It was so good to see. Hands sort of freed us back up after, Hodgson coming in and starting the season. But then he sort of dipped down a little bit towards as the season went on, and which is why I think Lussick came in to replace. But yeah, it'll be very, very interesting to see how this plays out. I would love to see Hands. And if he does jag that 80-minute role, I'm struggling to figure out which cheapie I put in. So I think that would almost make the decision for me. So what about you guys?
So Brad Arthur said it's going to be a shootout basically in the trials to see who gets that position. Who would you put your money on? If you had to right now put your money on it, is it Hands or is it Lussick? Who gets the 80-minute role if it's an 80-minute roll up for grabs?
I think Lussick gets first go, given how he finished last season there. But, I mean, trials shootouts are trials shootouts. We'll have to see how it goes.
I'm going to say Hands. I reckon Hands is going to jag it, actually. Lussick is the safe bet, obviously. He's a good player, good, fairly consistent player. But I just think Hands is going to free up a lot of the Parramatta attack, and it plays in better with the team from an attacking standpoint. I think Lussick is probably better from the defensive standpoint. So it just depends on what Brad Arthur's focus is to start the season, and then obviously how well they perform in the preseason. But we'll see who's right at the start.
Yeah.
Hey, Scoop, something you just said then scares the living daylights out of me. If I or someone else is going to look at doing hypothetically a double cheapie hooker setup and looking at potentially one of these guys, if they get the 80 minutes, let's say it is Hands, let's say. What you just said before, Scoop, and the words you just used scare the daylights out of me, because that is, what if you start with Hands and you've got Brayley, let's say, as your second hooker, which would be most people's dual cheapie hooker setup if you were to run that combo. And then Brad Arthur decides after 3 rounds, after getting less than desirable performances, I've chosen the wrong hooker. I need to switch to Lussick. fantastic for Parramatta potentially, but absolutely devastating for Supercoach, because now we've got an underperforming Hands that we've copped those low scores, and now we're trying to look at having to make that switch across to Lussick. Money-wise, we'll be able to afford it, but it's potentially come around 3 or 4 when there's still a lot of moving going on in your Supercoach team and trades to get the best team on the park and build as much depth and value. It's not a great time to be trading hookers, whereas I can see the benefit in starting with a Grant or a JMK, and it's a set and forget type and not have this headache to deal with. It's a bit like why I try to steer clear of Canberra players as well, particularly Canberra forwards with Ricky Stewart. I see as far away from that as I can, when I can. This could be another headache in the making as well if he gets it wrong after the first few rounds.
Yep.
That's the problem with going cheap. Sometimes you've got the risk. You've got Harry Grant, but that also costs 400-500K more than these other options. So are there any other, I mean, I guess there's probably one other cheapy hooker option I've seen floating around a fair bit, and that was Danny Levi. Now, there's been a little bit of word that Wolford tried to get out of his Raiders contract and go to the Dragons, but was knocked back. And that started to turn the wheels a bit and make us think that perhaps he's fallen down the pecking order a little bit, and Danny Levi might start the season like he did last year before he had that terrible broken jaw. So is there any value in going Levi as one of these basement options?
Hard to answer that, hey? Like it's a difficult one to answer with the information we have at the moment. You're kind of making a lot of assumptions and guesses in there. And if you're talking about piecing your Supercoach team together right now to make that decision, I would steer clear of it, because you just don't have enough information on Ricky Stewart and what he wants to do. So I'd steer well clear of that, to be honest, until we see trials, until we see roles, until we see if that potentially he is at a favour and Levi is someone that actually is being looked at. I think steering clear of that situation would be good for your Supercoach team until we can learn a lot more. And once again, like we've said a few times in this podcast, it's another one to add to the list. TLT and trials will tell us a lot of information with that team and whether or not that is an option. But yeah, if he absolutely gets the minutes, there's potential that also we can throw him into the mix of cheapies that could potentially be that second hooker.
I've got a very odd play that I'm doing with my cheapie hooker, which I think almost everyone is going to disagree with me on this. But I'm running with JMK, and then my backup hooker is Havili from the Rabbitohs. And the reason I've got that is because I think he's, especially if he's playing and is definitely on the bench and potentially replacing in for Cook, or just jumping on the field and playing at 13 or just in the forwards, he does have that 2RF spot and dual position. So I can move him if he's playing good, or he's at 370K. I can trade him out for one of the Eels hookers if they do get that 80-minute roll and are on fire before that sort of first 3 weeks. I like the Rabbitohs draw, even though they're going to Vegas, coming back. They do play a couple of different teams, but they've got a pretty consistent draw. So I'm doing the Havili for now. We'll see how that goes. I did have Gordon Chamkung at the start because I really think he's gonna start. Well, I think he's gonna at least be playing this year and will be a cash cow for most players once he gets in. But I thought it's probably safer to go for a player that I know is going to be playing. But that's my play. Who's going to roast me first? Is it you Scoot, or is it how are we going to do this?
Look, I was going to say there's worry with Danny Levi only getting sort of 30 to 50 minutes, not being that good of a scorer. Yes, he's 100K cheaper than Brayley, but then we've got Havili, who might not even get that and is even more expensive. So I just don't like it. Sorry, just don't like it at all.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Charity, you're on your own there.
Yeah, no, I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. That's fine.
No, it's not a setup that I could play with, but I'm be interested to see how that pans out for you. If that's how it comes around one,
I'm probably going to change before rounds start. Let's just put it that way. But that's just sort of where my mind was at to begin with. I can't decide on what cheapie I'm going to do, and that's why I was saying at the start, if one of the Eels players jags that 80-minute hooker roll, then it's a no-brainer for me because I'm pretty stuck with what I'm planning on doing.
So let's just discuss quickly, just very quickly, that the Parramatta hooker conversation that we've just had late this afternoon, based on the news that Brad Arthur released around wanting an 80-minute and only wanting one gun hooker or one hooker, main hooker for his team. You've got obviously the two options that we discussed. If you're looking at Grant at the moment, who the absolute premium will most likely be the number one averaging hooker in Supercoach at the end of this season, I think it's pretty safe to say that will be the case. He's been scoring well above everyone else for the last few seasons. So if you look at someone like a Hands, though, who's the most expensive option, $342,000, you're talking about $440,000, I think it is, saving to go from Harry Grant down to Hands. Now, obviously, that's great. What it comes down to, though, is what you do with that money. If you're just going to splash it around your team in no real thoughtful way, then you're not going to get the value back from that $440K. But that $440K could absolutely be spent in increasing the points output from your team if you do it correctly. So yes, you would go down from a Harry Grant to potentially, if your number one hooker became Brendan Hands, and let's say Hands averaged what he averaged, only a very small sample size, we all know that, of 80-minute games, but of 80-minute games he had a 56 average. So let's just say he comes down to a 50 average over an 80-minute games, and that 56 average was with very little attacking stats whatsoever in those 80-minute games, let's say. So there was some attacking stats in those 80-minute games, I apologise, but there was more to be done if he was to play more 80-minute games. I believe there's more attacking, as you mentioned earlier on, Mr. Charity, in Brendan Hands' game, how he can play with Moses and with Dylan Brown. I think it's really exciting what he can do from the dummy half role. But if you're saving $440K and you're dropping down from Harry Grant down to Brendan Hands, it's about a 20-point on average drop, 25-point drop, but you're saving $440K. My question to you guys and to the listeners out there and people watching this live on YouTube is, what could you do with $440K? Could you reinvest that into your team right now in a way that would get you an additional 20 points on average or more somewhere else in your team? Because if we go off the actual stats of last season, that's what it is. So can you actually go and look at one of the, if you look at your teams right now, and a lot of the people out there watching this podcast, have you got a center, let's say, sitting in your team right now that's 250,000, 300,000, 350,000. One of those guys who typically, we've done this over the years, they generally put out a 30, 35 score. We have a couple of them in a team because that's where we save our money. What if you reinvested that into a $350,000 hooker and you got yourself the most premium hooker, center wing, my fault. What if you reinvested that 350 into your center wing and went from a $350,000 center wing up to the most premium center wing, a Marzu or an Asako, hypothetically? Do you not think you'll get 20 points on average better value out of that cheapy center compared to an Asako Marzu over X amount of rounds? You don't even have to do that. There's other ways you could spend that $440K, but I think it's food for thought. Do you have to run a Grant and a cheapy setup, or can you actually bring in a dual cheapy hooker setup and use that $440,000 elsewhere to make up and some the difference? And it's not just the points that you're making up, it's also the dollars. You're also then putting in someone that's going to also go up in value and not stay the same, where Harry Grant most likely stay the same or fluctuates up and down a little bit. But you've got Brendan Hands, if he does keep that 80-minute role, who will definitely increase. So you're making money and you're making more points potentially. It's just something to consider, and I don't know whether everyone is considering it or they're just dismissing it straight away because, no, you have to start with Harry Grant because that's who you always start with and he's the best. I have to have the best. I don't know. I would just challenge that a little bit. Have a think about it. Have a play. See what you can do.
Well, I mean, while you were talking, I just did that trade just to see what it sort of freed up for me. And give me your opinion on what you think is the better combination to go with. I had JMK and Havili, but let's ignore Havili for a second. Let's just assume I have another cheapie. JMK and Jaden Brayley. And then in my fullback position, I had Pappenhausen and Jaden Campbell. I've now traded down to Brendan Hands from JMK and gone for a Ponga or a Drinkwater, for example. What do you think on those as an option? Is that something that is a smarter move to make? Because the Ponga, Drinkwaters, they're going to earn much more than the difference between a Hands and a Grant or a Hands and a JMK.
I do think so. I did something very similar to what you were saying, SuperCoach Corrupt. As soon as the news came out, I was like, that's a lot of money I'm going to turn Harley Smith-Shields or like a basement centre wing into Isaac Tungo, because if he sits at right centre next to Cleary, he could turn into like a top 3 centre wing. So I think that points gap is probably bigger, and you can invest that money elsewhere as long as what Brad Arthur says he's going to do actually comes to pass in round 1 TLT. If not, we're all going to be ripping everything to shreds again.
That's the thing. And look, worst case scenario here is what you'll lose is trades. What you'll lose is potentially 2 trades here. So if the worst case scenario happens and Hands doesn't perform to those 3 80-minute games that he did have, and he performs lower than that, or Brad Arthur changes his mind because he can do that, then potentially then we have to downgrade the Asako or the Marju or the Brian To'o and go, right, let's go and pick up the best performing midi centre option that's about to go up in value, and we'll get that money gain there, and we'll also then jump onto a different hooker combo and use that money as to get Grant, JMK, whoever the best performing hooker is going to go up in value with. So the moves that you can still make there, and the good thing is you'll be doing it with information on hand. So you'll be able to go, well, hang on, I can see JMK's got off to an absolute flyer. There's talk about Brendan's Hands now having job security issues. Let's make that switch now to JMK. We'll downgrade Asako or Marju or To'o to that centre wing that just pumped out 290s, 200s, and he's about to have a huge jump. And we can jump on him as well. There's still moves that you can make even if you get it wrong. It's not the end of the world. You just got to take a breath, relax, and just work out, well, how can I make this work for me as well? You've got to be versatile. You've got to be fluid. You have to be flexible with the Supercoach team. You can't just go, Grant is the only option. Like he is, and he'll be the number 1 for this season, no doubt. But there's other ways to win Supercoach than just get the best players to start off with in round 1.
Oh, 100%. I've had something similar going on while Grant was in my team. I was like, there's a lot of these expensive premium guys I've got, but which ones are actually going to make me the most points? Should I have a Grant in my team and turn Nathan Cleary into a Mitchell Moses with a really good starting draw and use that money to do something else? Now, with the news, I'm probably going to put Nathan Cleary back in and just run Dylan Brown at 5'8", so I don't have 2 competing halves. But I think there's a lot that you can do with the flexibility of the money and just going forward in general.
Absolutely. End of the day, we've all played this game before, right? And we know that you can't have every gun to start a season off. You just can't. You can't have a gun in hooker. You can't have guns in front row, second row, and all the way through your team. You've got to find the money somewhere, and you've got to work out where's the best and most strategic way to save the dollars. And what we're all talking about here is don't rule out, doesn't say you have to go down this pathway, but don't rule out the option that maybe I should have a little play with what could I do with that money, and could I make up those points and some if I did do a dual chippy option at hooker. I'm not saying it's the way to go, but I definitely think it's foolish of anyone to rule that out as an option. I think you just got to have a look at it and have a play. You have to save money somewhere. You can't afford 2 gun fullbacks, 3 or 4 gun halves and front rowers and a Payne Haas and a Harry Grant. You've got to save. This might be an option to save, but still get a bit of a discount on a player that might average around that 50 mark potentially.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Is there any other hooker options that you guys think are worth discussing, or should we move on to some questions? I've seen a couple of questions about, is it Sonny Luke season again, everyone?
I saw that as well. That's hilarious.
I definitely think Blake Moser. We'll see how that goes. Actually, do you think Blake Moser is going to get a bench spot at all with the Broncos, or is that he's Smoothie, Pakes, Walters?
I'm just going to turn my light on in this room. Sorry, guys. 1 second.
Well, I
I
think he'll get it eventually. It's like the Brisbane version of Jack Harth. He's coming, guys. This year's his year. He'll be there eventually. But yeah, I think there's a good chance. But I mean, Smoothie replaced Pace. Does he sit there for half the year? Does he sit there all year? I just don't know. I think for that situation, don't play Blake Moser. He probably won't play to start the year. And for Sonny Luke, I just don't want to do it. Like, what's changing? I don't know. Just give me some of these other ones with some more upside.
The thing with Sonny Luke as well, I know it's only a joke on the questions, and I appreciate that, but Sonny Luke, he's not a 20-year-old kid coming into the team that Penrith can go, well, we've got time to develop this kid. We've got to give him the runs on the ball. We've just got to start bleeding him into the games and giving him more game time. he's unfortunately he's a little bit older, so he's not really at that point where Penrith need to be doing that. When Mitch Kenny's getting a job done out there, Mitch Kenny's doing a solid enough job for Penrith and allowing the stars to shine in that team. So I don't really know whether they need to be blooding a Sonny Luke. In all honesty, I'll be surprised if one person chooses Sonny Luke. And I'm going to be looking at the first thing I'm going to do when SuperCoach opens, how many people bought Sonny Luke in 2024?
4.3% ownership. No. Yeah. All right. I think that pretty much wraps up everything. All right, SuperCoach Corrupt. If you've got one hot take, you've got. I think, look, Mr. Charity, I think you've sprung yours on us already with the Havili take. What about yours, SuperCoach Corrupt? What interesting, spicy take do you think that we might see at hooker this year, just for the position in general or a player?
Look, I'll give you two. One is I think the dual cheapy hooker setup is a goer. Very, very quickly looking at it, haven't gone into too much depth besides a small dive into it. But from a quick little play with it, I think it's possibly a goer. So there's one. That's only come on us this afternoon. The other one, I'm going to say that Wade Egan has no HIAs in 2024 and is top 3 hookers for 2024.
I almost wanted to say that as well. I would really love him to do well this year. He's sort of promised for a few years. It'd be great to see him too. Okay, the one that I've got is it will be Jake Granville season again during Origin when he's full into base and everybody goes away to Origin.
Incredible.
Nice.
If any of our tips come true, I would be amazed.
It'll be great.
You watch it. Everyone's going to be trading in Havili week 4. I reckon everyone's trading him in. I know it's happening.
You're ahead of the wave.
We'll see.
Great stuff. Look, there's something different every year. Last year, the Warriors came top 4 and blew us away. There's going to be interesting things that we don't expect. And as you said, SuperCoach Corrupt, doing well at SuperCoach is all about being flexible and just having a little bit of a plan in place for multiple options coming out.
Yeah, 100%. You can't be stuck in your ways. You really do need to look at it. And I think last year was a perfect example. It was a different season last year, the same as what we have this season, but it was the first time where we're looking at buys every round, major buys, minor buys. Like, it's just a different season to what we've all played. So you just need to be flexible with that. And I think as super coaches, we've probably learned a lot of lessons from 2023. And hopefully in the hooker role, we can take some of those lessons into it. And also with some of the other positions that we discuss over the next few weeks, hey?
Yeah, sounds good. I look forward to those next couple of podcasts. So thank you everybody for watching this Hooker podcast. Make sure if you've enjoyed and want to follow us for the upcoming ones, make sure to like and subscribe. This will also go up on Spotify with the audio on it. If you want more content, a bit like this, a bit of discussion, join the SuperCoach Hub Discord link. I think that'll be in the link below. The link tree is in our bio. And are there any socials that you want to plug, Mr. Charity?
Not so much socials, more just an activity that we have in the SuperCoach Hub Discord channel. Those who are already in there will see an event that will pop up soon. Those who aren't, make sure you follow the link and jump into the Discord. It's free to join. You can jump in and send in your teams. But we're actually going to be doing a full team review every Thursday where you can submit photos of your team and we just actively discuss them in the community. So you can just sort of get a little bit of feedback and a little bit of ideas from other people, not necessarily, your gurus and all of these other random people that you see on these podcasts, just the everyday Joe in the Discords, giving their opinions, feedback. And you can also give your reasons as to why you've picked a player that might help sway some other people or might deter them from picking them, like a Havili option. But yeah, Thursday nights we're going to be jumping in there and doing that review. We'll pick a couple of people and whoever's ranked the highest in the Discord will be chosen first, and then we'll get through as many as we can.
Yeah, that'll be great. Well, I look forward to that. That'll be some good banter. Mr. SuperCoach Corrupt, anything you'd like to plug before we finish up?
Not really. If you want to follow anything else that I'm putting out there content-wise, you can jump on Twitter, particularly on @SuperCoach Corrupt. I release different things on a daily basis, so jump on there if you want to listen to some more of my rubbish.
Oh, high quality rubbish though. We've got to admit. Yeah, if I'm in the SuperCoach Hub Discord as well, so you might see me there from time to time. Or on the fantasy side, I'm on the NRL Cricket and Fantasy Analysis YouTube channel. And look forward to the Thursday night show and the Wednesday night one for the next analysis, hosted by Monster Mash, The Myth, and Rugby League Realm. We'll see you guys then.
So yeah.
See you guys.